The 1960s, an era of rock and roll, groovy fashion, and cultural revolutions. But did you know that many homes still had a coal chute tucked away in the basement? A literal portal to the past. It was a time when survival wasn't always about convenience. What were the essentials back then? And how did people get by without today's gadgets? Today, we're going to dive into the top 1960s must-haves that shaped life and became nostalgic icons. Let's get started. Number 11. The typewriter. Typewriter. A true icon of the 1960s and a key player in the evolution of written communication. Back in the day, this was the tool of choice for authors, journalists, students, and just about anyone who had a report, letter, or novel to write. There was something magical about it. The rhythmic click-clack of the keys and the satisfying ding at the end of a line made each writing feel like an event, not just a task. In the 1960s, typing wasn't as easy as it is today. No backspace key to erase mistakes. If you made one, you had to manually correct it, sometimes with correction fluid or tape. There was a certain charm to it though, right? A real sense of effort went into each typed letter, and for many, typing was almost an art form. Fingers dancing over the keys, composing entire pages of text in a single sitting. People even got excited about the newer models that promised smoother action and faster typing speeds. It was more than a machine, it was a tool for expression. Fast forward to today, and typing on a computer or tablet feels so different. The sound of a keyboard is almost silent, and mistakes, well, they're easily deleted with a quick tap. It's not just the retro vibe, it's the feeling of permanence, the tactile experience, and even the pressure of getting it right. People are now rediscovering typewriters today for that very reason. They want something real, something physical. Typing on one today is a throwback to a time when writing was more personal, deliberate, and full of character. Speaking of vintage items that had us working a little harder for our comforts, the typewriter had a certain charm, didn't it? But if you think working for comfort ended with writing out your thoughts, think again. Surviving those days was really difficult because even something as simple as a bath was an event. But what if I told you that something so luxurious as a bath was once an elaborate affair? Number 10. Clawfoot tub. The classic clawfoot tub, a symbol of elegance and luxury. These beauties were everywhere in the 1960s, and honestly, they still hold a special place in the hearts of many today. Back then, having a clawfoot tub wasn't just about taking a bath. It was a moment of self-care and a chance to relax and escape after a long day. The design itself is timeless, with those curved, freestanding legs making it a statement piece in any bathroom. But these tubs didn't have all the modern bells and whistles that we've come to expect today. No jets, no heated seats, no fancy shower heads. Just a deep, spacious tub that made you feel like royalty as you filled it with warm water. You'd settle in, maybe add a bit of bubble bath, and just soak for hours. In the 1960s, survival without modern conveniences like mass-produced, easy-to-install bathtubs wasn't a huge problem, but it definitely required a bit more patience. You had to fill the tub manually, either with hot water from a kettle or by running it yourself, which took time. That's not something we're used to today where we can just jump into a preheated tub within seconds. Now, clawfoot tubs are making a comeback, not because we need them to survive, but because they carry a nostalgic charm. Their vintage look, paired with that of an old-fashioned luxury feel, is a reminder of a time when taking a bath wasn't just a quick routine, it was a luxurious experience. After soaking in the luxury of a classic clawfoot tub, you might have wanted to relax even further, right? The warm water still lingering, and the only thing that can make the moment even better is the soothing sound of music filling the room. But we're not talking about any modern streaming app. Back in the day, you had to earn those melodies by dropping a needle on a vinyl record. Number 9. Records. The record players and vinyl records, this combo was the soundtrack of the 1960s. Back then, spinning vinyl was how you'd experience music, not through streaming or MP3s. You'd place the needle on the record, and you were transported to a whole new world. The sound? Rich, warm, and full of personality. Nothing like the digital high-tech stuff we have today. These weren't just music players, they were the centerpiece of living rooms. Families, friends, or even solo listeners would gather around the record player, flipping through albums like the Beatles and Elvis Presley to enjoy hours of music. But it wasn't just about the sound. Vinyl records gave music lovers a physical connection to their favorite tunes. You could actually hold the album and read the liner notes and admire the album art. Today, vinyl is experiencing a major comeback. People are seeking that nostalgic analog sound. It's the imperfections in the sound, like the crackle of the needle, that people love. It takes them back to a simpler time when you couldn't just skip to the next song or shuffle your playlist. You had to listen to the whole album, front to back, and that's what made it special. In the 1960s, survival without a record player wasn't really about necessity, though music was certainly important for mood and entertainment. After indulging in the rich sound of vinyl records, you were probably ready to kick back with a cold drink. But hold on, this wasn't just about popping open the fridge and grabbing an ice-cold beverage. No, back in the day, we had to get creative. If you wanted ice, you had to work for it. Forget ice makers. Instead, you had metal ice trays. These nifty contraptions that would make us twist, bend, and sometimes pray for the perfect ice cube. But how did something so simple become such a key part of our daily lives? Number 8. Metal ice trays. Before modern-day plastic ice trays and ice makers came a staple in every fridge. Metal ice trays were the gold standard for chilling your drinks. The design was simple but effective. A metal frame with individual compartments that you'd fill with water, and a lever to pop the ice cubes once they were frozen. You'd have to work that lever like your life depended on it, but when those cubes came out, pure satisfaction. These trays were a lifesaver in the 1960s. If you wanted ice for your drinks or to cool down your food, you had to rely on these humble metal trays. The process was pretty hands-on. You'd fill the tray with water, and then about a few hours later, you'd be rewarded with perfectly square ice cubes. The sound of the lever snapping back, the feeling of satisfaction when those cubes came out, just right. It's a little piece of history that feels comforting today. It's a reminder of how things used to take a little more effort and how survival back then was all about making do with what you had, whether that meant wrestling with frozen water or hand cranking your way to a chilled drink. Now, after enjoying a refreshing cold drink with perfectly crafted ice cubes, it's time to set the mood for the evening. But before the flick of a switch, your house needed some serious lighting. And we're not talking about fancy chandeliers or modern LEDs, no. Back in the day, people relied on kerosene lamps to illuminate their nights. But how did that even work? That small little lamp lit the entire room? Is that even possible? Number 7. Kerosene lamp. Back in the day, these lamps were a trusty backup for when the power went out, especially in rural areas. Before electricity was widespread, kerosene lamps were the go-to for lighting homes. They burned kerosene oil through a wick, offering a steady, warm glow that lit up countless family dinners, late-night chores, and quiet reading moments. The design was simple yet elegant. A glass reservoir for the kerosene, a wick that soaked up the fuel, and a chimney to regulate airflow and brighten the flame. Unlike older oil lamps, kerosene lamps were relatively smokeless and reliable, making them a revolutionary lighting tool for their time. They brought light to homes without needing bulky electricity grids, and easy to use and maintain. Today, people associate kerosene lamps with simpler times, camping trips, cozy cabins, or a bygone era when life moved a little slower. You might even find one in a hip cafe or as a quirky decoration at a home. But surviving with just kerosene lamps back then wasn't all romantic flickers. The constant need to refill them, trim the wick, and clean the soot meant that it wasn't as convenient as flipping a light switch. So while we now marvel at their vintage charm, let's not forget that they were once a daily necessity that shaped evening routines and brought people together. Now, with the soft glow of kerosene lamps casting shadows on your evening, it's time to add some sound to the scene. But forget Spotify and smart speakers, for in the 1960s, radios were the true stars of entertainment. People would gather around their radios eagerly waiting for the latest news, music, or the ever-popular drama shows. Can you imagine how the crackling sound of the radio could captivate an entire room, even when the world outside was dark and quiet? Number 6. Radios. Radios in the 1960s weren't just gadgets, they were lifelines. whether it was the Beatles rocking the charts or news updates about the space race. Radios had a way of connecting everyone, no matter where you were. It wasn't like today, where you can scroll through Spotify or catch podcasts on your phone. This was survival. No radio, no connection. Simple as that. But here's the cool part. College and pirate radio stations were the rebels of the airwaves. Pirate radios, broadcasting from offshore ships or hidden locations, broke away from the government regulations and pumped out music that wasn't playing on mainstream channels. These stations became iconic for introducing underground artists and counterculture messages. College stations, on the other hand, where students experimented, blended activism and alternative sound into their playlists. They brought fresh perspectives and voices, shaking up what was considered popular at the time. Today, radios are pure nostalgia. Many people collect vintage transistor radios as a nod to a simpler era, one where tuning the dial was half the fun. It's wild to think about how these crackling transmissions once held the power to inform, entertain, and unite entire communities. It's hard not to admire the resilience of people back then, relying on these trusty little boxes to stay connected. Now that the mood is set, you'd think everything's a little more comfortable, right? Well, we're not quite there yet. While we had ice delivered to our doors, another delivery was probably something a bit less glamorous. No indoor plumbing, no flushing toilets, just a good old chamber pot. That's right, a necessity for many households back in the day. These pots were there to make sure no one had to brave the cold night air just to answer nature's call. But how did people survive without bathrooms as we know them today? Number 4. Chamber pots. Back in the 60s, especially in older rural homes without indoor plumbing, chamber pots were a nighttime lifesaver. Essentially, these were large, durable versions of modern children's potties, even often made of china or enamel and tucked discreetly under the bed. No one wanted to brave the cold, dark trek to the outdoor lavatory in the middle of the night, so these handy pots kept things a little closer to home. What's wild is that chamber pots weren't just about survival, they carried a touch of elegance as well. Many were beautifully designed, sometimes as part of a matching washroom set with bowls, jugs, and soap dishes. Practicality and decor all in one. Still, emptying the pots in the morning was nobody's favorite chore. Whether you were the first adult awake or simply drew the short straw, the task was all part of life before indoor plumbing became widespread. Today, they become a quirky piece of nostalgia, something you'd spot in antique shops or museums. They're a vivid reminder of how much modern conveniences like flushing toilets have transformed our lives. And honestly, can you imagine waking up every morning to empty a pot as part of your routine? It's both fascinating and humbling to think about how people managed without the luxuries we often take for granted. And after a long night, you probably want to get your hands on some fresh cold milk to start the day. But wait, back then, it wasn't as simple as popping by the store. Instead, you'd have your milk delivered straight to your doorstep in those classic glass bottles. Number 3. Milk bottles and delivery. Before there were grocery stores and fridges stocked to the brim, there was a time when milk was delivered straight to your door. Every morning, a milkman would make his rounds, leaving glass bottles or even boxes of milk at your doorstep. And no, they weren't just for your cereal or coffee. Milk was often delivered fresh and daily, straight from local dairies. The glass bottles, with their shiny caps and bold labels, were a staple of the time. You'd leave your empty bottles out and the milkman would replace them with fresh ones. This service made life a lot easier, especially when refrigeration wasn't as common or reliable as it is today. You didn't have to worry about running out of milk or taking an extra trip to the store. The milkman was your personal delivery guy. The thought of waiting for milk to be delivered might seem like something out of a retro movie. The milk delivery system was a lifeline back in the day, but now it's like a forgotten tradition we can't help but smile at. We've moved on to bigger and better things, sure, but there's something so cozy about remembering those times when you could just wait for the milkman to show up and everything you needed arriving on your doorstep. You're getting your fresh milk delivered right to your door every morning, the familiar clink of bottles signaling the start for your day. But as convenient as that is, how do you actually let somebody know you need more milk? Or maybe tell your friend about the latest neighborhood gossip? Number 2. Rotary phones. The superstar of communication. One phone per household typically rested in a central location like the kitchen. These phones were the heart of family interactions, where every call was a surprise since caller ID did not exist. Each morning ring brought the thrilling mystery of who could it be. Using a rotary phone was a tactile experience. You'd stick your finger in a number hole, spin the dial clockwise until it hit the metal stopper, then let it whirl back with that satisfying zzzt sound. Dialing each number was almost meditative, a rhythm that defined phone calls back then. The numbers often had 2-letter prefixes which came from the local telephone exchange. So instead of just numbers, you might be dialing something like BE Ackwood 4-5789, making it feel almost personal and rooted in your neighborhood. These exchanges weren't just practical, they were part of the culture, even inspiring songs like Pennsylvania 6-5000. Do you want privacy? Tough luck. Unless you were lucky enough to have your own phone line, a luxury for teenagers in the 60s, every call was a public affair. Parents could easily eavesdrop by picking up another phone on the same line. And forget midnight chats. Most families had strict rules about late-night dialing to keep the house quiet. The rotary phone wasn't just a gadget, it was a social hub and a symbol of connection in a simpler era. For one, it didn't let you rush through things. If you needed to reach someone, you had to take your time. There was no instant gratification, no texting or direct messages. And in a way, it made conversations more intentional. Today, with smartphones in hand, the idea of a rotary phone almost feels like an antique of the past. It's like something you'd see in a black and white movie or a vintage store. And yet, there's something charming about it too. Something that makes you appreciate the convenience of today's technology, but also look back fondly at simpler times. The rotary phone reminds us that sometimes slower wasn't always worse, it was just a different way of connecting. Without the convenience of modern phones, surviving in the 60s meant getting comfortable with patience. Now that your home is filled with music, creating the perfect atmosphere, let's rewind a bit. In the midst of this cozy setting, there's one thing you'd probably not think about: the warmth of the house. But how did people stay warm in the 1960s, especially during winter? Well, this is where coal chutes come in. But just how essential was this back door to warmth? And what does it tell us about surviving without the modern comforts we often take for granted today? Number 1. Coal chutes. The quirky and often forgotten portals tucked away in the basements and walls. The 1960s, instead of relying on modern heating systems, many homes were heated by coal, which meant coal delivery was also kind of a big deal. But how did coal get inside? Through the coal chute. This small, sometimes slanted door or window to your basement would allow coal to be dumped directly into a storage bin ready to fuel your furnace. No coal chute? Well, then you would just have to haul it through the house, which, let's be real, was an absolute hassle. Now, why does this seem nostalgic today? Well, imagine surviving a cold winter without central heating or gas-powered furnaces. The coal chute was a lifesaver. Families had to stockpile coal in preparation for the winter, and with this system, there was less mess and no need to track coal all over the house. It was all about survival. Heating your home without a chute meant a lot more work, and trust me, the coal dust was no joke. Today, the coal chute is a fun reminder of a time when things weren't so automated. It's almost like a little time machine, connecting us to an era where life had a little bit more grit, and literally so. Though we no longer rely on coal to keep warm, the nostalgia behind these little chutes lives on. People today love the vintage charm they represent. Maybe because they remind us of a time when survival meant doing things the hard way, and everything from heat to light felt earned. But what do you think? Which of these do you find the most fascinating? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure to check out our other videos on our channel. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe, as it does help us out. Thank you as always for watching, and we hope to see you in the next one.